Okay, welcome back, everyone. We'll continue with the next session, and the chair will be Gordon O'Brien on e-flows. Gordon, are you available?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, you can go ahead.
Great, thank you, Vaynant. Thank you, everybody, again for and Vaynant, well done, and team for a wonderful conference. It's been good to again hear of so much work that has been done during these difficult times, which is really fantastic. Thank you again for the opportunity to host this session and to contribute to SASAqS. So it's been fantastic. In today's session, we have a range of 5 presentations by, it's dominated by my team, I'm afraid, of scientists who are working on the Limpopo floodplain. And then I've just got I've presented some papers on work that we've done in Africa on floodplains and some work on hydropower. And then Chantal has presented work as well on environmental flow requirements of macroinvertebrates associated with rivers in the Kruger. And yeah, that's also part of our larger study as well. So great. I think what we'd like to do to kick the session off is just to allow everybody just to take a few minutes just to present their scope of work, and then we'll jump into a discussion session. Vaynant, is that all that we need to do? I think that's it.
That's perfect, eh?
Great, thank you. So what I'd like to do, and I hope that you guys have had the chance to have a look at the presentations on the YouTube channel. So what we'll do then is, in order of the presenters on the YouTube channel, Angelica, if you're online, please could you start and just take a couple of minutes just to give an overview of your presentation. Thanks.
Yeah, hi everyone. So thank you for the introduction, Dr. Gordon. So I'm currently a master's student finishing up this year at the University of Mpumalanga. And for my study, it was part of the fish community assessment to determine the environmental flows for the Limpopo River Basin. So during our survey, we only caught 37 of the expected 57 fish species, and we saw that the fish were actually in an altered state. The multivariate analysis during the study showed that change in the velocity depth classes, substrate types, and cover features, as well as the water quality variation, were a significant driver of our fish communities. The fish communities in the Limpopo Basin, the anthropogenic activities that occur throughout the basin and accumulate in many parts of the basin, like water quality, altered flows, habitat destruction, and barriers, as well as invasive species, were significant cause for those changes in the basin, or for the changes in the fish community in the basin. However, there is work needed to understand the less abundant species and those that were absent, which could be due to sampling error, or whether it is actually due to the anthropogenic activities that occur throughout the basin. Thanks. That's just a brief summary.
Thanks, Angelica. And then please, just to remind everybody who's attending the session, that you can raise your hand during our discussion session, or put notes into the chat box, and we'll attend those questions when we start our discussion session. The next presenter that we're going to introduce is Chantal. Chantal, can you please give us an overview of your presentation?
Hi Gordon, thank you so much. I'm going to speak on Vaynant's laptop. So hi everyone, I'm Chantal Barrense, and I'm a first-year master's student from the Northwest University, and I've been working on the environmental flow and habitat requirements of aquatic macroinvertebrates from selected rivers within the Kruger National Park. Sampling took place during the low flow periods, and all available habitats were sampled both in and out of current. And as we all know, the in-stream environmental flow is used primarily for maintaining both the development and the reproduction of target organisms, and offer optimum habitat area for macroinvertebrates. The main aims of the study was mostly to determine how macroinvertebrates respond to different flow conditions, and to identify an indicator organism that are sensitive to the changes in habitat and water quality to provide an indicator for the environmental flow conditions of the rivers. Preliminary results indicated a decrease in diversity between the sites, and the data collected, I'm still first year, so the data collected from the field surveys are still being processed for the updated results. Thank you, Gordon.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think something that'll come out in the discussion is that you'll see that Angelica, Chantal and Stacey have all been collecting evidence that we use to describe relationships between flow and ecosystem and flow and some social aspects. So I hope that we can broaden the discussion about that a little bit later. And then I have included two presentations. The first is on sustainable hydropower and environmental flows in Africa. And what I attempted to present on behalf of my co-authors in that presentation is to review the two publications that have just been published this year. The first on the outputs of a workshop that was hosted in Nairobi, where participants from around the world came together to discuss aspects of the hydropower boom in sub-Saharan Africa, especially in the region around Kenya and the Nile and the Congo. And it was very useful and interesting. We had the opportunity to pull some specialists together and put together a publication that in effect resulted in good practice concepts for sustainable water resource management in the context of small-scale hydropower and environmental flows in sub-Saharan Africa. And then a second case study on Uganda. And what really was interesting about that case study, which I've highlighted in the presentations, is not just the role of environmental flows and how that can contribute to sustainable water resource management in the sector, but that this concept of run-of-river hydropower plants and what we observed in the field, and I've included an example, is not very environmentally friendly at all. And we're fortunately being able to identify and highlight issues associated with this concept that we can have environmentally friendly run-of-river hydropower activities. That was the first one. The second one was on African floodplains, and here we presented our outcomes of work we've determined the environmental flow requirements of and the consequences of altered flows in the Inner Niger Delta in North Africa, the Sud wetland in the Nile Basin, and the Pongola River. And each were unique dynamic ecosystems with dynamic drivers and socio-ecological scenarios and systems. What was really interesting about the Inner Niger Delta and the Sud was that we're in a supply exceeds demand situation where there's a lot more water available than what the environmental flow requirements are, and that we're in that stakeholders were in an opportune position to decide on how to get the balance between use and protection rights. But then in the Pongola floodplain, we highlighted not only that the system is under stress, that environmental flow requirements, and here we just looked at a risk assessment where we considered the effect of altered flows as well. And here you can see the system is extremely vulnerable to the upstream developments, which include the Pongola Port Dam. And what the other very interesting outcome of that study was, in a relative context, to look at the effect of various land use change scenarios, development scenarios, and the value of the Ndumu Game Reserve. So that was a very useful outcome. And that's those two presentations. And then Stacey, can I invite you quickly to give a brief overview of your presentation on environmental flow requirements on the Olifants River?
Yes, sorry, I don't know if my screen is too bright. Maybe I should turn off my video. Hold on. Right, hello. Yeah, my name is Stacey Gerber. I'm an MSc student registered at Northwest University, but I'm based at University of Mpumalanga. As Dr. Gordon kindly referred, my study is on riparian vegetation as ecological indicators of flow requirements. The study was part of a larger study for the Olifants River, or the Limpopo catchment, sorry. But my MSc is focused on the lower Olifants River in the Kruger National Park. So what we did in our study, we conducted cross-section profiles at each of the sites, and we, with those profiles, we were able to pinpoint exact locations in terms of elevation of each individual plant along the transects. With each point, we collected biological data, including the plant height, cover percentage, and the substrate data, as well as water quality and discharge data. So from these models, we were able to create lookup tables, which provided us with activation and discharge readings. So what this is, it provides us with information on the amount of water required to reach each individual plant along the transect. And with that information, we were able to determine the hydrological niche of each individual plant species. And with that, with the analysis data, we could determine the communities. The disadvantage of this is that it's very site-specific, so activation, discharge, or the elevation of each plant on that transect is very site-specific in terms of topography and the substrate distribution at the specific site. So in order to overcome this, we had a specialist hydrologist prepare exceedance tables. So what that provides us with is a percentage of time in which certain discharges are met at a specific site. So what that interprets into is for each individual species, we were able to tell the the percentage of time that each individual species experienced its hydraulic niche, so its hydraulic preference. And so with this and the data analysis with this, what it's provided us with is it told us that the species were responding to low flow scenarios. And so there was a very strong relationship with that. We are still processing all of the results for the data, but so far there's a very strong relationship to low flow for the riparian vegetation communities, and there's a very strong relationship between the substrates. So what we found is woody species, as well as sexual reproduction species that reproduce sexually, as well as taproot systems has a strong relationship between larger substrates, and the latter for finer substrates. So yeah, going forward, we hope to apply this method to the Nkomati basement catchment for my PhD. And yeah, thank you. That's a brief summary of what I did. If there's any questions, I look forward to answering them.
Thank you, Stacey. Thank you. Okay, so we have two quick questions already. I've received another privately via email, but I think let's just get through the questions on the chat box quickly by Jeffrey. Jeffrey, good to see that you're attending this again, and nice presentation earlier. And his questions to Chantal about the reasons why you sampled in the low flow. I know the answer, Chantal, but go for it.
Hi, Gordon. Thanks. You can help me if you want to. But yeah, because I was sampling during low flow, it makes the habitat easier to quantify, and the flow is more stabilized, so it can be easily monitored, and it creates more habitat as well. And then higher flow, it makes the sampling easier as well. So during the field surveys, it's quite difficult to sample during high flow. Thanks.
And just to add that, you know, if from an environmental flow perspective, if you're looking at critical flows, low flows are the lower flows is where you start to get problems and we're experiencing issues. So that's where you can take low-hanging fruit and collect evidence to describe minimum requirements. You need to do that during low flows. Great. And then another question from Nico. Again, good to make contact with all these people again. Wonderful. It's for Angelica. I'm interested in water quality impacts that you may have identified. Has your work been written up in a report yet?
Hi, Nico. Thank you for the question. We are busy in a report. I'm not sure if we can send it, Dr. Gordon, if it's finished yet or if it's access to the public. We are still waiting for some of the analyses. So Prof. Victor and them ran the analysis at NWU for us. So as the only main stuff that came out was pH and electrical conductivity that were in poor ranges for most of this, or for some of the sites. But yeah, I'm not sure if that answers everything you want to know about the question.
Yeah, it's not done yet, unfortunately. And there was another team who provided water quality data run by Prof. Victor Weppener that contributed to data from derived for all of us in this Limpopo study. So that will be available. The study is being undertaken through the International Water Management Institute as a part of a larger program for LIMCOM, and it will be published and made available as soon as the project's complete. Excuse me. And then there's a hand by Vainant, but quickly let's just get to Pitt's question. Stacey, this is for you. If you've determined e-flow requirements for vegetation as a part of your study, how does it compare to the reserve and the reserve requirements that was already established for the Olifants River?
Thanks for your question. Unfortunately, we haven't yet gotten to that point in the results, the analysis of our results. We're very excited to see what it does tell us, but so far we just able to say that there are definite relationships between the riparian vegetation communities and the flow. But for now, we haven't got an exact figure for that for each individual, or more specifically to the communities at these sites that we studied. I'm not sure if Dr. Gordon wants to add something to that yet.
No, just that, you know, the reserve is gazetted and legally binding, and that information is going into the outcome, all the existing reserve determination outcomes for the catchment. And, you know, we're going to do some comparisons. And again, so Chantal, Angelica and Stacey's work is really contributing to evidence to describe those relationships, and we'll be able to use that to compare the outcomes. We are currently at the stage where we're comparing what evidence we have to suggest what the requirements are to what the reserves are. And I think, Pitt, the only indication which has been concerning is that we're probably going to request more water, and we need to understand what that means, where and what and why, what that means. Yeah, I hope that we can also continue with that discussion. So there's a hand up by, I think it was Vainant. I can't see exactly who it was, but I think it was, yes, it's Vainant.
It's me. I actually have two questions, but I'll follow on like your comment on Pitt's question, and you mentioning that you'll request more water. I mean, do you mean more water as base flow, or more regular releases and flood releases, or fresh sort of refreshers? Or I'm just interested if you have some data on that, or especially in the Olifants, which is already over allocated in most cases.
Yeah, so look, it's preliminary, so it's a bit dangerous to specify exactly where and what. But you know, one thing that some of the reserve determination methods that have been undertaken before, Vane, have not specifically considered the floods. So some of it is, and a lot of it is in the floods. But I'm unfortunately at this stage I can't really specify if it's how much, if there is a change to base flow requirements. I know that we have had some discussions about new information on hydraulic relationships that demonstrate that the minimum requirements to achieve those in-stream flows based on subsurface flow changes the requirements we've needed. So, you know, by taking into account, for example, flows that are lost through subsurface flows in those alluvial riverbeds, you need a lot more water to make sure that you have the requirements you know, that are flowing in the river at a particular time. So that's pretty interesting. But a lot of it's coming together. So, you know, these guys have presented, and their presentations just include some of the evidence that describes the relationships. Unfortunately, we're not yet at that stage to give you some of the outcomes, although we do have reserve flow requirements, but I mean, that was only determined this week. This project should be completed early next year, Jan, Feb. And then hopefully there we'll be able to provide that information to you, Vane. Your second question?
Yeah, I'll get to the second question, but I see Pete Kurtz has also said something in the chat in terms of testing the scenario predictions with Bayesian networks and how accurate they are in real life. And my question and comment is the same thing on, we have a reserve and it's gazetted and whatever, and there's scenarios and the research, your research adds to that testing of scenarios, testing if it's actually realistic, and sort of closing a feedback loop on, is these comprehensive reserves that's been done on with the methods, actually VAT realistic based on 10, 15 years ago, but many of these reserves were actually done. So we sort of testing these reserves now and saying, well, maybe we need more water, maybe we don't, maybe we missed floods. And so it's really important to sort of get this going and keep it up and test these reserves that's out there.
Yeah, so that is such an important consideration, and you know, this approach and the approach that we've used in case studies across the continent is supposed to be adaptable and supposed to be utilized in an adaptive context. What we do in our risk-based probabilistic monitoring approach is try to, so Vane, sorry, just in terms of application, this is just a bit of context for Pitt's question. Is that it is hypotheses of how the system would respond, and we have had very limited opportunity to test them, because we do present the uncertainty associated with the relationships and the outcomes, and we do provide monitoring approaches to test not only our understanding of the relationships, but also whether or not the predictions are correct and it's working. So I think that's unfortunately early days, but we are interested in some of this locally in the Limpopo and the Nkomati to do that, exactly that, and also to really embrace that adaptive aspect of the approach, which I don't think has been used well suitably yet. And then Vane, you know, interestingly, there's been a relationship, there a group of stakeholders in the Lowveld region working together in somewhat of an informal environment, have been working on maintaining environmental flow requirements in some of the rivers in the Lowveld. And you know, I can only speak on behalf of people like Eddie Riddell and Sharon Pollard, who have worked on the Olifants and some of the rivers in the Kruger. And during our recent drought, you know, they were begging, borrowing, stealing, diverting flows from available storage facilities in the basin to provide requirements in the Lowveld. And I know that what has been really interesting, so we weren't a part of that at all, but from discussions we've had is that it was tremendously valuable. You know, the impact of the recent drought compared to previous droughts, simply because of that stakeholder group who were working towards maintaining minimum flows was incredible. That the system has not been as impacted as it has in previous occasions. It's anecdotal at the moment, I think, but I hope, and if any of you are here, it would be nice to hear from you. But I hope that they're going to pull that together to demonstrate how important environmental flows are. And I think that also links back to what Pitt's question was about, you know, it's one thing to propose a requirement. It's another to make sure that it is achieving what it was designed to achieve. And importantly, how adaptable are these processes? You know, if we find out that there is additional or new information that can help us describe a relationship or requirement, are we then incorporating that, and how do we incorporate that? And then before we get to another hand quickly, we got a question from Patsy. Previous reserve work has included floods. Also, if the EWR is gazetted, how will the requirements for additional water be implemented? Yes, Patsy, that is the case. And I'm not entirely sure. Sorry, I'm not working that part of our study where flows have been included. Or in fact, I think for the Olifants it's been included. I know that, but I'm not too sure for the rest of the basin. It's been gazetted. What do we do now while that it's being gazetted? I had the privilege, or nay, the challenge to be a part of RQO projects with Water Affairs in between 2012 and 2020. The Act doesn't have the legal, as far as I understand, the legal avenue opportunity for updates and revisions, and that was identified as a shortcoming that we know needs to be changed. You know, the RQOs themselves, if I can just shift towards a resource quality objective, it's an objective in the sense it's not a requirement, it's an objective, So stakeholders need to work towards achieving a particular water quality, quantity, habitat, or biota condition, and they need to demonstrate that they're working towards it. Well, what do you do when you've achieved it, or what do you do if it's not realistic? You need to be able to adjust it and adapt that. And I'm sure that they will look at that. And I think we need a bit of time to implement some of these EWR requirements in the context of resource-directed measures and the reserve, and then see how they perform. And that would be a very exciting new field of research in South Africa, because South Africa has really developed and determined so many reserve requirements and implemented RDM or determined RDM requirements. I'm not necessarily suggesting that they're being implemented, comparable to other countries. So it would be very, very, very cool. It would be very interesting. There's another question by someone whose hand is up. I'm going to quickly try and find out who that is. It is.
It's Victor here from Under the Bus.
Yes, go for it.
Just in response to Nico's question related to water quality, I'll speak about the Olifants River specifically. It would appear that the nutrients are extremely variable during the course of the year. So the 2 years of monthly sampling that we've done, and that seems to be the biggest problem. In the past, it used to be a lot of salts, so the TDSs seem to have decreased over the past 10, 20 years in the Olifants River system, as well as the majority of the other salts. And to my thinking, the biggest biological response to the changing water quality would be an altered habitat for macroinvertebrates due to the algal growth. So it would seem that those filamentous algae mats that form during certain times of the year and would be the biggest response to the change in water quality, and then the resultant macroinvertebrate and probably fish changes as well, or responses as well, and not so much in your face toxicity related to altered water quality.
Thanks, Vic. Sorry, I'm for throwing you under the bus there. I know that you have data. Just know that these guys didn't have that data on hand. Thank you. Herman Leroux, you have a question?
No, that was me posing as Herman.
Okay, thank you. And I think, I think some of our take-home messages here, and I think the discussions entering that or moving into that direction is that, and I've advocated this before to SASAqS, is that it's one thing determining all these requirements, and they are in effect hypotheses. We really need to look at implementing them, because I know many of you here and many who were here have argued that it's tragic to just continuously go back to some systems and see that they're declining, deteriorating. Having, and considering that the Olifants water quality may be improving, it would be very special to see why and what the implications are from an ecosystem perspective if things are improving. Yeah. Any other? Patsy's got another. Is it you, Patsy? Yes, go for it.
Hi. Thanks very much. This is all very interesting, of course. First of all, just from what Victor was just saying, yeah, we do often find that the nutrients is actually more of a driver than the salts in a lot of the systems now. And that's also the diatom work and the algal work is really an important component, because as Victor was saying, that impacts then on habitats. So yeah, that is the kind of water quality issue that's coming up quite a bit. And then Gordon, what you were talking about, yeah, I agree that there's been a lot of EWR, we've determined a lot of the ecological water requirements and we go back to them, and possibly, that testing of EWRs that have been determined is really important. So maybe we should be, first of all, the implementation should happen, and then we should be testing the implementation of these things, so that you do go, and all these monitoring programs, the RQOs, everything that we've set, we now need to go into that testing phase of all of those. And then the tweaking and the fine tuning. So it's almost like we're still stuck in the space of determining the EWRs and RQOs when we really should be going into the testing phase, testing of the stuff that has been said. Is it right? Do we need to tweak it? How do we tweak it? Etc. And that's just like that big gap that's still sitting there and it's still missing. But anyway, yeah, at least it's interesting to be getting out there and doing the work. Thanks.
Yeah, and I mentioned that I had a one email question to consider, and that question was considering different stakeholders. That, you know, I think something that we've missed is the opportunity for researchers to do the detailed research and in the context of testing these EWR requirements and or providing evidence for these requirements. And then consultants bringing their information together and applying the information and using the information and applying the tools and helping us to determine these requirements, and then stakeholders to implement them. And I think that's possibly a gap as well, is who's supposed to be doing what part and contributing to what part of this puzzle, so that we can achieve it. The Prof Victor, Prof Smith group, Herman Leroux, do you have a question? Vic, was that a legacy hand or was that a new question?
No, that was Gordon. Sorry, that was from the previous one.
Thank you, Herman. And then Wynand. Wynand has a question or a comment?
It's probably more a comment in terms of Patsy and your response about how do you implement these altered, if you want to increase the environmental flows, for instance, and it's been gazetted at a lower level. And the answer is probably in the successes that Eddie Riddell and Award with Sharon Pollard has had in the Willie funds, where you need stakeholder buy-in. To change the legislation to adapt those actual values will take years, which many of our rivers probably don't have. So it's getting the stakeholders involved, getting their buy-in, getting them to agree to increase flows, increase whatever or decrease whatever they need to do to improve the systems, rather than relying out and out on legislation to change it.
Yeah, and you know, if I can just raise a problem that they've experienced, and you know, we've discussed this in different fora, is that, you know, these stakeholders are all politely agreeing and trying to supply or provide water requirements. Some of the dams that they've used to provide those requirements actually were built for other purposes. You know, the water is allocated for agricultural or future developments, whatever it may be. So the problem was, I know that they've discussed, is that from a form, this is not a formal agreement or relationship where there are formal rules for releases of flows from different storage facilities. These are, do you have the flows available, and please release flows, and they do, and they have, and they can, and they do. And I think that's also a concern, is that, you know, this proverbial house of paper cards could come crashing down if it's not formalized. And it's crazy to think that we have the requirements, but we don't necessarily have the formal rules and or facilities that are allocated to achieving this in place. That we're still in a situation where stakeholders on the day are communicating to one another and asking who has water and who can provide water and where is it coming from. And that, by the way, from the experiences I think that I've observed in the Olifants River is probably different to what we've experienced in the Komati, where the CMA here is actually more involved, and there seems to be more rules and more decisions to say, please release from there, and it's done. It's not a request to say, is there water available and can you please help us? It's more of a release, and that seems to be what's happening. Patsy, you have another question?
I didn't actually. I think it was a historical hand. But Gordon, just from what you were saying now, I mean, it could just be that we have, because our country is so diverse, we may just have to have different ways of doing things. So I know with Eddie and where Sharon and all of them are, I mean, the stakeholders there are very involved, as you say, and things happen on the ground. And maybe that's going to happen in certain places versus another system where, like, the IUCMA is strong and it's you know, a more rule-based kind of system. It could be that, yeah, I mean, if you think about the couple of places in the country where these things have been implemented, the way it's done is actually pretty different. And that, yeah, we do need it to be a bit more structured, but maybe we are going to sit with different ways of doing it in different parts of the country, depending on how strong the authorities are or not.
And you know what I'd like to add to that, if that's okay, Patsy, is some experiences from our work in the Nile Basin and other parts of Africa. Is it's interesting to see how some stakeholder groups have less data and less resources than we do, but because of the seriousness of the management of flows, they're on top of the balance. They're on top of the supply and the demand and the allocation of, and the, you know, and in the Nile Basin, everybody knows that you do anything to the balance and Egypt squeals out of necessity. And what was really interesting in the context of environmental flows, and environmental flows in that part of the world was considered to be that system where everybody can come together and start to consider trade-offs and look at, you know, because everybody agrees that the systems have to be sustainable. So at least it was a common platform to start to discuss planning and allocation and development of, is this ecosystem sustainability platform. But what was interesting there, which is very different to what we do here, was that the concept of flows for basic human needs was fervently rejected. And, you know, interestingly, some of the arguments pertain to, you know, countries that are not going to manage their populations cannot then have a right to way more water than anybody else and hinder development in different areas, especially upstream riparian states. So they disagreed that basic human needs and livelihoods was a foundation for, you know, environmental flows to discuss that balance. They just stuck to the ecosystem requirements. And then the second interesting thing that we've observed was that in South Africa or Southern Africa, we seem to be able to come up with a vision for, you know, the classification. We call it the classification here in South Africa. That results in RQOs that are there to give effect to the classes. We can come up with a vision that represents that balance with recommended ecological categories. In other parts of Africa, that was also hate speech, because you're forcing us to decrease or you're forcing us to, you know, to worst but acceptable conditions, and stakeholders refused. So what tended to happen, what we observed in other countries, was that they required e-flows for, using South African terminology in terms of classification, again, is, you know, a class 3, a class 2, and a class 1, or e-flows for a D ecological category, a C ecological category, and a B ecological category. And then they would be able to then negotiate on a sort of case-by-case basis to try and, you know, try to achieve the best ecological category, but at least they knew what the threshold of sustainability was, which was that D. And a lot of the people who were involved in the project, a lot of the Europeans and Americans and South Africans who were involved, were very nervous about that, because in many instances, you know, we here tried to say, look, it's in a C, let's try and maintain that C, let's not let it deteriorate. And there they were actually providing information to demonstrate what it would look like in a D, you know, a deteriorated class. And that's what we need to do. So here we kind of think, you know, if it's worse than a D, it must be a D. But if it's in a C or something better, we must maintain that. And we generally reach consensus, but in other parts of Africa, it wasn't like that. Okay, any other questions or comments? Any questions about the evidence and the other presenters? Any questions about methods? about where we're going. No, okay. Herman, someone from your group?
Yeah, Gordon, it's me again, Victor. So you made an interesting comment a little earlier, and it's about the involvement of other parties, and a lot of the science and the monitoring science is actually being done by consultants in a lot of different projects at the moment. So where in the past we used to have the river health program with provincial champions, usually within some governmental sector, driving data collation, for choice of a better word. And here it's all people driven. I think that's something that society could perhaps play a role in, is being coordinators of data throughout the country. And in the Limpopo province, you know, if it's SASAqS, Robin taking on the position, because I suppose he'll get a lot of reports to evaluate from consultants, is to see how much data one can actually get together, which is not part of a formal monitoring program, but these sorts of odds and sods that are taking place in a site here and a site there, which collectively becomes the system.
Yeah, and you know, in the rest of the world as well, there's a new, well, it's not really new anymore, but these environmental flow frameworks that stakeholders or regulators manage, they collect data and use that data to then, you know, with low confidence, propose requirements for areas that haven't been assessed. So, you know, as you say, it gives you new opportunities to start to not only improve our understanding of the requirements of systems, or to improve the ability to make good decisions to ensure that that balance between use and protection is achieved. But, you know, we're moving in the same direction, and the benefits are tremendous. I agree. And from this morning's presentations on databases and information, you know, the only question that I have is, you know, what's been really interesting with my experience in this space is that stakeholders, regulators versus developers, are very clear on whose responsibility it is to determine the work. So if you have a developer who has to determine environmental flows as a part of an EIA process, for example, they're going to determine environmental flows for that site. They may be asked to look at regional implications, but they're really interested in their development and their activity alone. Where it's the regulators like Water Affairs, Water and Sanitation, who are responsible for bringing all of those requirements together and synchronizing those requirements, which I also think is not necessarily being adequately undertaken. But it's, I mean, the ideas are there and the responsibilities are there. But if we could adapt and we could build, and if SASAqS can support that process, because we're a community of scientists, especially where there are vacuums, because programs like the River Health program, that was once upon a time a society-driven endeavor, is not as active as it used to be. That would be wonderful. I think if I can throw the question out there is what's the first step? What do we do? Patsy?
Yeah, just following on from that conversation, it is true that it's about people, and actually maybe we should stop. You know, I mean, everyone always says you've got to stop waiting for someone to come or government or whatever regulatory authority to come and take things on. So maybe we should just acknowledge and recognize the fact that we are a group of people. So, I mean, that's what we do with water quality methods. If there's any change, we contact each other, because although there are a lot of things, there should be a repository of information at DWS. People still contact me for information on classification and reserve studies because it can't be found at DWS. So maybe what we should do is, in the different provinces, like we did with the River Health program, where we are champions, is maybe identify key groups of people or whatever, and so that the stuff goes there. So that if there's a consulting project, You know, if one can distribute it and publicize it, that people know if they do a consulting project, even if it is on one side of a catchment, as you were saying, Gordon, but at least the person in the province or the organization in the province or something is alerted, so we know where this information is. Because without the River Health Program, without us being able to rely on DWS to know where the reports are from a reserve or a classification study, we sort of lost. We're relying on a couple of people that we know, and maybe we should formalize that a bit. Maybe, you know, all of us should actually run those kind of systems and formalize it so we know where all the information is.
And just before, Vic, before you chat, again, is, you know, these things require resources, but we're not even asking for it. So I know that we need time and we need money, but we're not even asking for support. So, you know, we can't say we don't have any time and we don't have any money to do this, or without first thinking and coming together and say, how could we possibly raise funds to do this, because it's our resources as well. So I totally agree. The Provix group, someone had a hand up there.
No, Gordon, we don't have any more questions. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, I've neglected the chat box a little bit. There is another question from Wynand. Linked to this lack of monitoring and the number of sites are recently referred to recent work on the Olifants, Matabish and Gwetsi and Tugela. Yeah, very useful. And that's the data going in is fantastic. Something I've also, and that comes back to as well, I just wanted to maybe again advocate you know, if researchers generate data, we generally publish it and it's available. Consultants don't necessarily do that because they don't have the time and the resources to publish. But you know, that would also be very useful, of trying to find a way to get that data formalized and out there. And that could be a role that a society like this plays, where we have different stakeholders supporting each other in different ways. And then just a few, if this could be the vehicle for curating the data, that is very exciting. And I totally agree, Patsy. I know with not just Water Affairs, but other stakeholders, they'll contact you and ask for that cruise report that was done in 1999 again, next year, again. So I agree with you. Any ideas of what to do first? You know, this can be done on a sort of region by region basis, or should we propose to come together as a society and have a workshop dedicated to discussing how to get this going? You know, let's maybe spend the last 10 minutes talking about hitting the tarmac with our tackies. You know, and maybe another question is, what about Water Affairs? What about Water and Sanitation? They are the regulators, and you know, they haven't really been represented this year at SASAqS, as I've seen. I don't know if there are any Water Affairs stakeholders on the discussion at the moment who can contribute. Patsy, you have another question or suggestion?
No, I was just thinking that yeah, it might be. I think it would probably be useful for SASAqS to take some kind of role, even if it's just a role in coordinating everybody. Maybe some kind of, you know, this online thing is easy to do, and one can, you know, dedicate a couple of hours. You don't have to waste all that time traveling everywhere. So, although we missed that, of course, a lot, but yeah, maybe if there was some kind of workshop to think about how we would put something like that together, because also from DWS, I agree with you. I don't see a lot of representation, which is quite odd, I think. But I mean, there are so many really solid DWS people, especially in the provinces and in the regions. So maybe it really is a time for that real doing it together thing, where we all support DWS as well, and but maybe on a provincial kind of basis with SASAqS maybe having some kind of overarching role just to do the coordination, get everyone together so that we can sit and think about how we do it. I think that'd be quite useful. You do always need a leader of some kind. Yeah, but I think in the provinces there are really solid people, whether they're consultants, researchers, academics, and DWS officials in the provinces, and we just need to find those people that will make it work. And then the support, like from Helen and all of those guys on the databasing side, we could really make it work.
So what's the possibility of like low-hanging fruit? And Helen, this comes back to your suggestion, is what about a PhD study where someone can really go and collect available data on, you know, resource-directed measures, procedures, and outcomes, and publish data for the country, and pull that together into the database? Is it enough just to suggest that you need a PhD student in a couple of years, or is this something? Is my suggestion something that's going to cost too much and require too many people?
Gosh, it could be done either way. I mean, yeah, it definitely is going to need a warm body or warm bodies. So either a PhD student with like that being 100% focus, and then they act as the person who gets hold of people and trawls through, because, you know, the reality is it's sitting on people's desks or computers and not readily available. Some of them are. And then in terms of guiding them with bringing the data in, that's obviously something we can facilitate within our organization and through the FBIS. Alternatively, meeting with, you know, as Patsy suggested, provincially, but then you need to get a person to spearhead it for each province. So, I mean, if one could get funding and the interest of a good PhD student, that may be, you know, quite a good solution. Just like Mohammed Kaji did his, you know, his focus on the fish, and, you know, a lot of he started as a master's, upgraded, and, you know, the first year and a half was spent, you know, consolidating data, but now he's got that data resource and the questions that you can ask and the interesting, you know, PhD level analyses like the modeling, you know, is something that can be achieved.
I just think that, could you imagine how useful it would be if this type of information was linked to the SASAqS database, where, you know, you've actually got the real requirements and present ecological state and e-flow requirements spatially distributed across the country. That would be a game changer, because then it mobilizes, to use some of those words that were used earlier, you know, our ability to use the information and to test it. You know, so that would be great. I just wanted to add quickly as well that I think that before we get too far down this road, we would really need to contact Barbara and Joaquin at the RDM office, and I think that I think that Water Affairs has been struggling, and if they do get any support, they would actually jump at the opportunity to work with different people, and I think that other supporting funding groups like the Water Research Commission would probably support this type of endeavour. It may not be that hard to pull together if there are a few people who'd be interested in coming together to do this. I heard, Vainant, I think you had a hand flash up and flash away or something? No. Okay, one more thing, I think, just the last few minutes we have, and I hope this is not the worst possible time to ask this question, but what's going on at RQIS? You know, the support we had from them and the important role that they played. I've seen or heard recently about how there has been a lot of expertise that has recently been lost from RQIS, and you know, I heard Gerard has gone to environmental affairs and others have retired. I think that we should also try and find out what is the status quo of those type of support entities. Any comments on that? Yeah, it's been Patsy, go for it.
Not really a comment, but yeah, I know that the labs, there was a real problem. I mean, we are seeing DWS sort of wake up again now after, what, 3 years of not very much happening at all. At least things are coming back into play. I'm not sure about RQIS, but of course for us, you know, when we talk about people and provincial basis and pulling people and all of that together, we must remember, and I see Mike Silverbars just posted a comment, we must remember our colleagues, our very useful colleagues that have just retired, like Mike. There's a whole pool. I mean, if we really are going to try and pull something together and work with Water Affairs, there are really a lot of very useful people like Mike Silverbauer and Sebastian Uester, all these guys, and Niels Kleinmans, who have recently retired, but are still out there to provide a huge amount of assistance, support, and guidance, of course, with all the experience. But yeah, one would have to find out, as Mike has said, to get hold of the RQIS director. I'm not too sure who the director is at the moment. I don't know if anybody knows, to see what is going on there.
Mike, can you comment who is the current director? And I know Krista's still there, or I think Krista's still there, but I don't know who else is still there. Lots to think about, lots to do. I haven't been in contact for a while. Yeah, I think that's what we need to do as well. So we need to find a funder to support the involvement of professionals and students in this endeavour. I think so. And what I'd like to suggest, please, is I don't mind to just facilitate this with my help from my guys as well, just to facilitate this proposal. So please, if anybody is interested in this type of collaboration and trying to pull some funding together for a student, and I really like the idea of at least trying to get Empower FBIS to expand to possibly include this and look at the implications, and just contact Barbara and Yakin's directorate. I think that's just what we're proposing, so please contact me. Thank you. Sorry, Wynand?
Maybe just a suggestion on a way forward is from SASAqS side, if we will coordinate, I think, an endeavour like this, and maybe we can create a working group or something like that to sort of meet in the next, maybe this year's already passed, but early next year, to just maybe you and I can coordinate from SASAqS and Patsy and Helen from the FBIS, and just do 3 or 4, 5 people just to get a plan together, and then identify people who should be involved, and then we can maybe get a workshop, a bigger workshop together, and get it going in each province, and identify people from every province, but a small group to start off with, and then as we go along.
Thank you, Vane. And so I think please can we rather send contacts to you, Vane? Would you mind? Because I think this must be a SASAqS endeavour, I agree. And that would be wonderful. So I'm
not volunteering, but I can coordinate.
Yes, please, Vane, because I think that and we want it to remain that way, that it is a SASAqS endeavour, because that does carry some weight. So that would be very special. Thank you. Guys, our time has run out, or our time's up. Thank you very much. I think this was a good start at something that I hope that continues. Thank you again to the presenters. It's really special to work with all of you guys and to see what you're doing, and you know, you're all MSc level, so I'm so excited to see what happens going forward, you know, with your PhDs and your entering into and contributing to the field. Thank you for the comments. Many of the stakeholders who are in the industry already, thank you. Please be encouraged to keep going for it. And Patsy, I totally agree with you that these are our resources that we need to look after, and it's time for us to get involved. So I think it's been very useful. Thank you. Some comments coming through as well that this has been very useful and very good. The recordings are available, will be available if you want to share it. And I hope that these presentations, Van, I know mine, you can definitely use it as wherever you would like. So I hope that, you know, we can share some more of this information and build on this, the start of this important discussion. Thank you for your time, everybody, and back to you, Van. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Definitely interesting discussions in this last session that we've just had. So now it's time for lunch, and the next session will start at 1:30. So please log in a little earlier to be ready, that we can start on time. There's been two talks that the people are unfortunately not available in the last session, so that might not be available for any questions and so on. So the session might be slightly shorter, and we'll start with the awards and closing directly after the session. We don't want to keep everyone waiting and so on. So please make sure you log into our last general session, a wide variety of topics. Really looking forward to it. So enjoy your lunch, and we'll see you back in just under an hour. Thank you very much.